Good day, fans and gamers of the electronic age. We at the known website of Aristogamer would like to step back into the indie catalog and come out with a unique and rare gem. Would you like to tell them about the game, Jay?
I'd love to, Colonel. I just am not sure I played a game.
You surely must be sharing a tale with a humorous climax. You played through Dear Esther, did you not?
Oh yes, I finished Dear Esther, but I'm not really comfortable calling it a game.
Oh, fine. If you want to be difficult about this subject, what would you rather title it?
Interactive storybook seems most appropriate. Or maybe frustrating mess, or interesting thought experiment. Really, any of these titles apply, and even more so than the title of video game.
So what's so dear about her?
What?
About Esther. Who is this woman, and what's so dear about her?
According to many game review sources, there is much dear about Esther. It's been lauded as one of the best indie games of this year. It started off as a Half-Life 2 mod and grew into something much larger as its fanbase grew, gaining better graphics, tighter story, and a price tag. But was the time and effort worth the final product?
Dear Esther is certainly a thinking man's game. The story is told by the protagonist in first person, as if he's talking to Esther. Dialogue sequences are triggered by different events and are sometimes randomly selected, so multiple playthroughs are required to get the whole of the dialogue.
Yes, and while that is interesting, it does prove difficult to follow. Having a linear narrative aids along in the storytelling process, and Dear Esther really does itself no favors by also talking about 3 different characters at the same time. I often found details of their lives getting mixed up in my head, though they have next to nothing to do with one another. And another problem is the language. It's complex for almost no reason. I don't really see why they did that.
Indeed, a large problem for some people is the word choices in the dialogue. I found myself wondering sometimes if the dialogue was written and then skimmed over with something like a thesaurus to make it sound more impressive. The daunting language obfuscates the point the story attempts to convey, and often severs the connection with the player.
These waves of alabaster and azure titillate my morose corpus, almost as if beckoning me to the murky, yet somehow comforting end that would surely await. Translation: the sea looks good, and it makes me want to die.
The story may have been good, but it's difficult to tell, as it's quite difficult to get at it. It's almost like being gifted a box of chocolates wrapped in 12 layers of duct tape, almost impossible to access.
And even that would have been acceptable had the gameplay actually been good.
If the gameplay had simply been, I would have enjoyed Dear Esther more.
Usually, I critique what games do not allow players to do, but that list would go on forever with Dear Esther. It's much more useful to say what you can do. You can move the protagonist with WASDA at one constant pace, and you can zoom in, and that's it.
Yes, he's quite serious, and you can only move about, looking at things, watching your flashlight come on automatically, and listening to the protagonist go on and on about Esther or some sheep farmer or the Bible. 2 actions certainly do not make a game.
Indeed, and zooming isn't even necessary, so movement is really the only tool you have, and even that is flawed. The snail's pace at which the character moves about the game is almost insulting, and it's quite frustrating, especially when the game is supposed to be about exploration. Even if you approach the game as calm and level-headed as possible, you find yourself easily being frustrated by being on one side of the map whenever you're supposed to be on the other.
And when you correct your mistake 1 minute later, which by the way is an eternity in the Dear Esther world, you're sure to remember that lesson for, well, the rest of the game. Oh, hello, interesting path that looks like it leads to nowhere. No, I don't think I'll be having any of you right now, thank you very much. I'd actually like to stay happy. Yes, I'm sure that your path actually has some sort of minute significance, but in all honesty, I just feel like I'm wandering into nothing.
And this is such a pity because the game is absolutely gorgeous. Just look at this.
Why yes, the art is quite pleasing. Just look at it. It's almost like you can bask in its glory. Oh, and by the way, this is Valve's Source engine. Yes, Source can still look incredible all this time later, even if giving minimal visual representations for a story that barely has any connection with the environment you're in. But admire it for a second. Oh, and a word of note, don't fall in the water when you're not supposed to.
Oh god, why? I'm not even playing Amnesia! Help me, Esther, I don't know! Everything's fine now.
From start to finish, Dear Esther is quite a marvel to view. Its varying landscapes and interesting scenery make for a visual treat. It's just unfortunate that its impact is so dampened by the gameplay.
Being able to pick up objects or even just running would have made this game better. Unfortunately, they paired beautiful visuals with what really amounts to an interactive storybook. If I wanted to read, I damn sure would. I could appreciate the difference between a book and a game. Unfortunately, Dear Esther blurs those lines so much that the pros of both get lost in translation. Dear Esther, to me, was a 2-hour journey that was an exercise in confusion and frustration, the levels of which I have not known in some time.
Now wait a second, don't gloss over that, Jay. You completed in 2 hours, just 2 hours. I completed it in an hour and a half. I may have actually grown to like the game had I been given enough time. The idea of a non-linear, interactive story unfolding before your eyes is certainly an interesting one. But for only 2 hours and $10? I certainly think not.
So what's the verdict? Does Dear Esther deserve the small amount of time it asked for at its premium indie game price? Do the visuals and intriguing idea behind the game outweigh its shortcomings?
The short answer? No. The long answer? Perhaps in the future, when the game goes on sale. I would pay $2.50 for an amusing entertainment experience. But make no mistake, that's just what it is. And it's certainly not $10 worth of a game. This is just an experiment.
Games are held to a higher price-to-time sunk ratio, and unfortunately, Dear Esther just does not hold that standard up. Though, there again, I do hesitate to call it a game. Though if you do have some time to kill, and you can catch it on sale, perhaps give it a whirl. And the game is difficult to follow, but it is interesting, and the visuals are certainly impressive enough.
If you learn to be patient with its lack of quote-unquote gameplay and non-linear storytelling, Dear Esther is certainly interesting and will get you thinking, which is more than I can say for most games nowadays as it is.
Indeed. This has been J. Wellington Robofeller and the Colonel bidding you a good evening.
Of good gaming.